2, 1, and we're live. Whenever you are, wherever you are, thank you for joining the Design of Everyday People. That's what I'm calling the show, where I talk to senior designers from all over the world and where you literally get to ask them anything. So get your typing fingers ready while I'll try to weave in your questions and along with our conversation. But I also, like always, want to make this session as interactive as possible. So if you're tuning in, help me drop an emoji or the city you're calling in from, what time it is. Just blow that chat up so I know we're alive on the other side. And in the meantime, I want to talk to you about something I have going on. And this is my belief that education should not be a luxury. But the reality is that UX boot camps cost 15 grand plus. It's 30K for a university degree. It's 2K for most online courses. And after all that money spent, designers still end up somehow self-taught. I know this because I was actually there. Education in our industry is somewhat broken, right? Needlessly expensive, lacking real world application, not built for how designers actually work. And this is why I created the UX playbook, from building your first portfolio to leading your first design team. And everything in between, you can find resources that help you solve some of those career challenges you face without that theoretical BS. Focuses on actually how you do the work with guides, templates, examples, and a bunch of stuff. And once a year, I offer a discount for UX Playbook products, right? And it's November, so it's a great time to do this. And I call it the year's best deal because it actually is. Because last year it was 40% off for Black Friday, but this year I was like, why not? Let's just do 50% off, right? And I'm not just giving it for the 10 days leading up to Black Friday and all that stuff, but I'm just gonna say, hey, 50% off the whole November, okay? And all you need to do is scan that QR code or head to uxplaybook.org and enter the code FRIYAY25 and get 50% off. If you miss this, you might have to wait until 2026. Okay, I'm going to leave this QR code that I've got on screen in the top left-hand corner. So if you do consider it, I would really much appreciate it. But let's get back to the show with the intro video. This is the design of everyday people.
It sound right, boy.
Okay, I think we have some folks coming in. India Mumbai, 9:31 p.m. We're glad to be your entertainment before you go to bed. Love that. We have someone from YouTube, another folk from YouTube, Berlin. Hey there. We have Germany. We have some folks from Vietnam. Cool, guys. All right, keep dropping that city that you're kind of in, and let's get this started. So let me take this off. Welcome to How AI Changes Design. And with this Ask Me Anything, like always, feel free to drop your questions when they come up. Quick introductions from me. I'm Chris, the founder of UX Playbook. I just told you about what UX Playbook does. Again, here's that QR code. But let's get right into it. Today, I'm joined by Shamus Grubb, a designer, a creative director, a strategist. Previously, I held roles at companies like Lego and Sony, which we spoke before on this call about. Now is the principal design director for GenAI at Microsoft AI. So we'll get Shamus out bright and early in Seattle and ask him how he's doing. How is it going over there?
It's going good. Thank you for having me on today. Can everybody hear me?
Yep. Yeah. Loud and clear. Yeah.
Great.
All good. All good. Dane, thank you for coming from Virginia and tuning in. It's probably early there as well, right?
It's about midday there. I'm originally from the East Coast, so Virginia. Actually, that's where my wife is from. My wife grew up in Northern Virginia, so.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Good connection there.
Yeah.
Shamus, before we get into the call, I want the audience to sort of know more about you. And you've had what I call a shit hot career, right? Like you've been doing a lot of cool things. So let's just give the audience some context here. Give us where have you been to help the audience understand, you know, from there where to where you are now? What's happened?
So I think one of the reasons it may seem like that is because I've been doing it for a long time. So I think that's one of the challenges, is that the more time you have on the ground, the more opportunities come your way. But I would say the biggest thing is recently I've worked at a couple of different places. My career has been divided into two big transitions. The first one was I spent the early part of my career predominantly working agency side, where I worked at agencies, because a lot of these large scale UX teams just didn't exist back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I started in 1997 is when I first started working in this industry. And so from that perspective, I was working mainly at agency side. I got a great opportunity. I think the thing that changed my life in a lot of different ways is I got a great opportunity to go work at a company called Sapient. And they moved me from the Washington, D.C., Virginia area out to San Francisco. And that's where things kind of really accelerated for me in a meaningful way, which was I got a chance to really start to work with a lot of different clients that I had never worked for. And I worked there for a while, then moved to a small independent design studio out here that in San Francisco that was really well known for craft and some innovation thinking called Otapod. And I did about a year and a half there. And while I was there, one of the things I started to understand is that there are two different metabolisms. And I talk a lot about this when I'm working with younger designers. I think you have to kind of confront what your metabolism is as a designer. And one of the things, and the way I kind of phrase this is that there are sprinters and marathon runners. And one of the things that I notice is that agency people are really effective sprinters, in the sense that, like, if you think about the formality of the physicality of a sprinter, they're not meant for long runs. They're really good at short, fast spurts. And then there are some designers that are more marathon runners. And I wanted to go in-house because I started to realize that a lot of my creative power was unlocked by the longer I spent with a specific brand or product. The more I could dive deep into it, the more I could research it. Researching is a huge part of just how I live my life. Really kind of informed how I thought about design. And so I went in-house at Sony. And I spent 7 years at Sony working on a bunch of different projects, specifically really taking a look at unifying all of our online practices into one global platform. And that eventually wound up taking me to work inside of Creative Center at Sony, which is the design studio inside of Sony in Tokyo for 2 years. Left there to then go work at Lego, working in what they originally tabled the North American Association, but eventually became all of America's, working on, and this was an interesting role for me because one of the things you'll see is that I've also done a lot of different things in my career, creative director, UX director. I had this really great, unique opportunity at Lego where I got to work on both an app experience, which at the time was called Lego Life, which was the first platform for allowing kids to share their pride of building, like a really great, like, I have 2 children now, and it's a real big thing. It's true. When my kids build something out of Lego, they immediately want to show me what they build because they're very proud of it. And the goal of this platform was to provide an interconnectedness using the online community to allow kids to do that in a safe place. So I got to manage that app. But additionally, while I was also managing that app, I also got a chance to work on all of our influencer strategies. So working on actually designing the physical boxes that we used to send out to influencers. And also within that team, I was responsible for looking at helping lead and support the team on the design of real world UX, which was the Comic-Con and Star Wars Celebration booths that we would do for Lego. And so that was a really great place where I got the ability to kind of move beyond just the digital and into the physical, and how do you move people through a space. And it was interesting how much you can learn in both areas from kind of multi-tracking that kind of an experience. But eventually my wife and I wanted to make it back out to the West Coast. And so now we've been here in Seattle, and I've been working at Microsoft for a long time. And the last 3 years, really diving deep on AI, was part of the team that kind of helped support the launch of both what was eventually Bing Chat, but then evolved into Copilot. In my role specifically was looking at that in the mobile space. And then the last year, I've been really diving deep into, and this is the topic that I'm really passionate about, how does AI change what we do as designers? Really starting to look at how do we start using it in the day-to-day practice? How will it transform how we do? And more importantly, what do we need to start learning as designers to take advantage of this tool that's there? And the way I kind of phrase this sometimes is it reminds me a lot of the moment that Steve Jobs first held up the iPhone. You know, we were all doing web design at that time, and we all had understood what web patterns were. We're at a very moment that's similar to this, in the sense that, you know, all of a sudden we all had to start building apps. And I can't take credit for this quote, but one of my GPM, my general partner managers in the Maps and Geospatial team here at Microsoft, made a comment once that we're at a moment where, if you remember when the App Store first opened up, the top 10 apps, some of them were whoopee cushion apps, some of them were apps where you would drink a beer through your phone kind of thing.
Yeah.
We're at that moment with AI where there's like no one really knows what works. We're in a completely blue space. And we have to kind of understand that we're going to make a lot of beer drinking apps and fart apps along the way until we figure out what the pattern is for this. Like, we've all grown up in an area where the patterns of what a successful app is are very clear, but that doesn't exist in this space. And that's something that I find really fun and exciting, is that we get a chance to kind of figure out what that is.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure everything we'll dive into. There's a lot to sort of go through there, but again, let me sort of set some expectations for our audience on the couple of things we want to touch on this conversation. So, as you mentioned, a shift is happening in design. New tools, new workflows, new capabilities. So, as production gets automated, thinking becomes more valuable. Creativity becomes the new premium. And I think this is why I wanted to speak to you on this topic. So for the audience, we'll touch on three things. The first one is like how AI separates design from production and what that really means for your role, because I think that helps. What skills actually matter, given the skills that all designers have, or a lot that they're trying to build. And then finally, again, how to sort of position yourself on the right side of this new movement, and not just again, forget the apps and just focus on web design, right? Like the moment you just mentioned. So let's first talk about this shift under our feet. I remember talking to you in the DMs, Shamus, and you mentioned this story about General Motors.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to quickly add that anecdote? Because that's a perfect setup.
Yeah, so it's something I've been thinking a lot about. And actually, when I first started working on some of the automation work that I was working on here at Microsoft, specifically around illustrations and iconography, I really started to think about this a lot, like what happened in audio manufacturing. And so there's a story in, I think it was 1965. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was close to that. Yeah. The first robot, which was called a Unimatic, was introduced by General Motors in New Jersey. And it was built for hot metal casting, which was a job that used to be done by people, but it was exceptionally dangerous because the injury rate was really, really high. And so General Motors tried to take a look at the first robotic arm that would allow them to do this work without endangering the people that were supposed to be doing it. And that was the first step that we saw towards, if you go to a current auto manufacturing plant right now, so much of that production, and that's an important discussion that I think needs to kind of be a through line through this, the production aspect of putting a car together has shifted, in the sense that it used to be done with a huge amount of human capital, but now that has kind of changed. There are still people that are responsible for designing what those cars look like, designing the structure with which that car fits into. I mean, if you think about it, car design is a really great metaphor for this, is that they design a uniform platform. So all these cars are built on a platform. That platform is then customized with different elements to then make a GTI or a Jetta or a Passat. Like, basically, they all are built on the same chassis, and then the accoutrements that are added to it are additional to that. A design team and engineering team needed to work to kind of design what is that interoperable system that you use to build that component. And then there's a conveyor belt of automation that then takes those different parts together and puts it together in the final car. Eventually, I think this is something that we'll start to see happening more and more in the UX space. And I think we haven't really had this conversation internally as an as a industry, because we haven't had to. But this division between coming up with what is the concept versus putting the concept together is something that happens in our world. There is work that we do, and a great metaphor for me is dark mode. We all have to eventually figure out how we're going to handle a dark mode thing. And that's something I've been experimenting with. I could see a day, I've already started to play with it myself, where if I can teach or train, and I think this is the key word when you talked about skills that I think we as designers need to start getting into, is we need to learn how to train these AI models to do what we want them to do. But starting to learn how to train, I'm working specifically with Claude right now on how to take UX patterns for dark mode and just generate the comp. So if I give it a piece of UX, I can then just say, convert this to dark mode, and then it'll do all the conversion for me. that is work that we used to spend a huge amount of time doing, but is that really work we want to be doing? Is that what we got in design to do, was to crank out a bunch of dark mode versions? I think that's something that we can, and maybe we do. I don't know. I don't think that there's any challenge in that, but I think we need to start having a conversation around the producing versus the inception, and how do we divide those tasks up, and where do we want to fall? Like I said, this is similar to the moment of being a sprinter versus a marathon runner. Where do we want to see our role changing, and how we engage with AI will be different depending upon where you fall on that spectrum.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What do you think? Do you have an intuition on like what things that AI will automate first, and what other things will definitely need sort of human insight? Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
oversight. Like
hmm
anything that comes top of
I
mind?
so I think, as with any standard role that you would have, and this also goes to another big theme that I've been chewing on a lot. And this is less about the tooling aspect of AI, but more
Mhm.
about how do we engage with AI from a UX perspective. Because what I've been talking to up to now has been, how do I use AI as a designer? But now when we talk about the UX of AI, the
Mm,
biggest question that keeps coming up to me is trust, and how do we build trust? And one of those challenges here is that, what is that trust pattern that we're going? And specifically when it comes to design tooling, when I've looked at these solutions, I think you still need a human in the loop in two areas. You need a human to set up what is the parameters and material that goes into what is the training data that helps make the AI accomplish what you want it to do. And then secondarily, what is the option that's selected?
mm,
So, I mean, in real terms, one thing that AI doesn't do a really good job of today, now this could change in a series of years, is that, if you, especially with image generation, if you're doing an image,
mm,
getting an image that you like, but then going, oh no, I really wish this was like a little purple. I wish this was a little green. Can we move this over like a couple of pixels this way or that way? That is not what these tools are really good at. What they are is a slot machine. And
mm.
what they can do is they can produce, in the sense that you pull a handle and you get three images. And if you keep pulling that handle, you keep getting three different images, and eventually you'll get to an image that you want. It's a brute force activity.
Right.
That means that you still need a human in the loop that comes in at the end and combs through all of those images and decides what is the correct image that you go live with. And that is also where I think our role changes from being the producer to being the editor and the curator. And I
Mhm.
think that again is another interesting aspect for us to start thinking about more of, like, how do we use these tools to brute force generating tons and tons of material that we then comb through and finding what is the gem within that. And to me, this again, I use a lot of metaphors. This reminds me of what it's like to be a crate digger. If you're really into music that leverages samples, the idea is that you're combing through thousands and thousands of records to find 2 seconds of a clip that is actually really meaningful. I think that's another mental model that we can start to use as a skill set that we need to start finding, is that, how do we look at this massive material that this thing produces and finding what is valuable within that, and then leveraging that, because it can produce that mass quickly,
Mm.
but then it's that refinement stage of picking and selecting within that. Is the term that they use a lot in the industry, is human in the loop. And so making sure that the human in the loop is always there for final approval of what goes live.
Yeah. And do you think, out of all the tools you've used, uh, be it,
Mm-hmm.
Lovable, Bolt, or, these, hey, make your product live in, a weekend, do you
Mm-hmm.
think the team there will help define and refine the training data so things come out
Yeah.
looking like other things, or things will make sense? Or do you think there's way more nuanced in that, the
Yeah.
production side, than they're kind of like leaning into?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thorny question that you raised there, because one of the challenges that I think you will start to see, especially for things like Lovable or even more Figma Make,
Yep.
and this actually exists in a lot of these tools, is that the decisions that we're making are actually making their tool better for everybody else, but they're not making it better for us, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
like, basically, in some ways, we're training all of these tools. We're doing reinforcement learning. That's what it's called. We're doing reinforcement learning through every action that we take and decision that we make. I mean, this used to happen a lot in the early days of ChatGPT. They would put up two answers and say, which one of these is better?
Mm.
That's us doing their work for them in all transparency. That's us That's us doing the cooking at the Korean barbecue restaurant. And it helps us because we get something tasty out of it. But at the same time, we have to understand that that's actually going back and helping them make their product better. And that's, I think, a big question that we as designers, as we're using these tools, have to think about, which is, which one of the things you bring up, which is that there does start to become a sheen of everything seeming kind of the same, because it's becoming a collective awareness of all the choices that different individuals make. And so finding those moments of uniqueness become more difficult. To do that, this is where, like, a great metaphor for this, and we'll take it out of the lovable and the bolt space, and we can take it. The best place to see where this is happening the soonest right now is in illustrations. And this is the generative AI image generation tools. This is exactly where I see as a precursor to what we're going to see inside of UX and other things, because it's the same challenges, but it's just distilled in a different way. A lot of these tools wind up having a really strong art director hand on the back end because they've been pre-trained on data that aligns to certain examples. A good example is that an easy way I find of finding when most AI looks like AI is because it's been super HDR'd. Or the other one that seems to have come out of nowhere is that everybody wants everything that looked like it came out of a Miyazaki film. And so like all the illustration style is very Miyazaki or very Pixar. And that is great. And you can leverage and get that stuff really, really quickly. But is that really ownable? And you can actually teach these tools. And that's something that, and this is again where I said, as designers, the biggest skill that we can learn is how to train. And one of the things that I've been experimenting a lot with has been using open source image generation models, like the models that are kind of the foundational elements behind all these things. One of them is the Flux model from Black Forest Labs. And then there's this thing called a LoRa, which is called a low rank adaptation. This allows you to add a series of images to a data set that then the model runs through 10,000, 1,000, 5,000 runs. You tweak it. These are things that you tweak to get the image result that you want. And then ultimately you have a model that only produces material that aligns to that style that you've trained it on. And so you're able to customize this. And this is where I think it's really important for us to kind of adapt to this mindset of learning. We have to learn how to control these tools, or the tools will wind up providing us the direction. And I don't think that's what we want. I mean, we saw that with Photoshop when it first came out, is that everybody's drop shadows started looking the same. And then what people wound up starting to do is they started building their own drop shadows, not using the drop shadow tool. Like I remember this, it's like, I had friends of me that were like, oh, I did like 3 different layers of different transparencies and shifted it 2 pixels off this way to make it feel more photoreal. And that was this aversion to like everything looked the same because people typed into the tool in that way. And so the way you do that through AI right now is you have to learn how to train. You have to learn what it takes to modify these models and make them do what you want them to do, rather than taking other people's instincts.
Right. I mean, the other side of this, Shamus, is that there are, these marathoners who spend so much time on their craft, dare I say, high craft, like the production value of their work is train worthy, right? Like if they have a series of work, you can feed it, and they have a very distinct style. So how do you reconcile those type of designers when they're like, they care so much about the production because they think that's their art? How does that play into sort of our field?
But that's, I think, the most important thing with this is that that's what. So it's 2 things. 1, how do we make that ownable? And then 2, how do we make that replicable through a model? Like that's the difference here, is that the model is not bringing the craft.
Right.
The model is learning instructions from us. This is the one of the things that I think we get lost in is that we think these models are smart, but they're actually not as smart as we think they are. They're just really good at predicting what they want to accomplish based on rules that we've set for them. Now, these rules are infinitely complex, but the idea here is that, think about it this way. You're basically teaching a young designer how to replicate what you do.
Right.
And like, even if we take like Ai Weiwei as a famous artist, but Ai Weiwei doesn't physically make every piece of artwork that he creates. He has a team of people behind him that help him craft these big visions that he has, but he has control over what that output looks like. That is the same thing that most designers that have a high level of craft can now do with AI is that once you learn how to teach an AI or create proprietary AI that can replicate what you want to with this, you can then start scaling that craft at a higher level.
Yeah.
And then we get into this thing of like, it gets into this interesting debate of design systems have always been this tension point within organizations. Is the design system enabling innovation, or is the design system becoming an enforcement tool? And one of the things that's really fascinating is that part of that is because updating a design system is a monolithic task. I think in the near future, you can start to have design systems that like, again, another metaphor, the fashion industry. Fashion industry rolls out different design styles 4 times a year for each season because they have figured out how to handle their production lines in that way. We could start to see design systems that update seasonally that are more reflective of what the terms are. Because, I mean, there's that old adage, I'm not sure if you've ever heard it, but I've heard it said in things, is by the time the design system is done and published, it's already out of date. Yep. Because like trends have moved on and behaviors have moved on. With these tools that can produce that can actually start to absorb that legacy debt of all the design assets that have already been replicated, being able to do that brute force through one of these tools means you might be able to update things on a more frequent basis, stay more relatable, stay more relevant in some ways. That to me also speaks to, but to do that, they need to have the craft that's necessary, which means we as designers need to be engaged with learning how to teach these things craft.
Yeah, you mentioned skill-wise about us being, the editor, the curator. How would one go about kind of like understanding and breaking that skill down? So it's like, okay, of course we need to try it, but what are some of the things that go into this curation and editorial process versus just pure production?
Yeah. I think part of it is also it's the interesting transition as somebody that's also been a manager and helped people make that progression from being a designer or an IC to a manager. One of the hardest things, and I remember creative director pulling me to the side on something, and he once told me when I was making this transition myself, he was just like, it's not about what you want to do, it's about what that person can do the best of. And the hardest transition for us as managers or designers that learn to move beyond being the IC all the time, and I still struggle with this myself to this day, is you have to let go what the vision is in your head and then learn how to shape the vision that comes out of somebody else's head. This is the big factor here is this idea of like when you're working with a designer, if you go in and you want that designer to make what you want and you have I learned very early on when I was working with other designers, sometimes I can't go in there with a preconceived idea of what the solution is. Because if I do, one, I might miss something amazing that they come up with. But then secondarily, I'm also doing them a disservice because I'm not respecting what they bring to the table that's important. I don't think I'm going to give that level of leeway to what some of these tools are capable of doing, but starting to develop that mindset, I think, as we shift from ICs to actually working with AI as our partners, we have to also understand that sometimes AI is not going to do what we want it to do, but we have to open our minds to look at it in a different way because we might find an opportunity where it would. A really great example is the first time we started looking at developing assets for a project that we're working on with using Midjourney. This was about 2 years ago, and one of the challenges we had is that we wanted to recreate architectural buildings in a specific style. So we wanted to recreate like the Space Needle here in Seattle was a great example. And we wanted to recreate that in a certain aesthetic style that had like a 3D/game puzzle piece feel to it. Now, what typically happens is an illustrator would want to create that image. They put that image into the tool and it would come back, and they never, ever, ever got the Space Needle right. They just could not be architecturally accurate. It just wasn't capable within the system. We tried a bunch of different variants. We tried different things. We tried different prompting languages. We could never get it to be specific. Now, most illustrators and designers would go, okay, well, it doesn't work. I'm not going to use this tool anymore. Having that more open mindset was one of the things we did notice when we looked at all of this was like, hey, we locked in a style here. We just can't get architecturally accurate. What if we change this to being more genericized? So if you're looking for, say, apartment buildings, I can generate high-rise apartment buildings, 3-story walk-ups. I can generate buildings that have more specificity to them. And what used to be just little points on a map or points in a search box can now be so much more illustrative because I can match a style with this and build objects, but it wasn't what I originally intended. It was something completely different, but it was an unlock for us to look at these things in a different way. I think at this point, when we're working with these things and they don't have that refinement capabilities, we have to avoid that. It didn't do what I wanted it to do. I'm just not going to use it. It's more about opening it with a sense of like I said, a designer may have come to me with a solution and we were going to go in one direction, but I look at what they put on paper and I go, oh, wait a minute, that's really interesting. We should go in that direction instead. And so it's important for us to look at these tools in that way because it can help guide us to what it can do really, really well. And that might unlock new potential that we didn't even really know that was there.
Right. And like with the image generation, I think that's a really good example of like,
Yeah.
do you think that open source is the way because you're sort of you have your constraints of your own style? Does other platforms like your Mid Journey or others, do they not do that, or do they have their preconceived styles?
Well,
Yeah.
there are ways that you can. One of the things that happens is a lot of people when they go to use Midjourney right now, and again, this goes to the biggest challenge with all AI, and we were talking about this right before we got on the call. The time between your first engagement with an AI tool and then the actual value coming out of that tool is actually quite far because there's a lot of work that you need to do to learn how to talk to this thing appropriately to get what you want out of it. One of the things that happens with Midjourney is they now have this thing called style reference, and you can use somebody else's style reference and then generate an image using that style reference. That's collapsing that distance for most people. And so the ability now is that you can generate really high quality assets really, really quickly, which is awesome. And I can see where that can also be really, really effective for teams if they develop their own style references and then generate those through Midjourney. So I don't think you need to be completely open source to accomplish these things. The bad side, though, is that a lot of people are generating their images and they don't know how to write the prompts that they need to get to what they want. And so they're winding up, again, inheriting other people's styles.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. But I think for us as designers, if we want to start using these tools in a more effective way, we have to learn how to break them and make them do what we want them to do. And that means that we have to learn how to write those prompts. And we need to go through that time and energy to exercise learning how to do those things and learning how to turn off some of the backwritten styles. Like, how do I make it not be HDR? I've done a whole exploration wing on my own right now, and I call it, I've got to find the time between having kids and a job and all those things. I've got to find the time to start publishing these. But every once in a while, I work on trying to make accidents happen through generative AI image tools. So basically, like, I do film photography on the side. I accidentally took a trip. We took a trip to San Francisco. I accidentally didn't realize that one of the rolls of film that I shot, I had actually already shot 5 photos on it, and I rewound it and saved it because I was going to use that roll later on. I didn't mark it, so I forgot what it was. I get back, and half of the photos on that roll were all double exposures. They were gorgeous. They weren't. It wasn't an intentional thing. It was completely serendipitous, but it was a beautiful accident. AI hates making accidents like that. So one of the things that I've worked on is how do I write prompts that force accidents like that? And that's a way that I've started to learn how to control what these tools do and don't. And that's the thing that we have to do is we have to learn how to experiment with these things and find ways that we can make it not do what it wants to do. How do we pull it away from that? And a really great tool that I learned for this is really interesting. The more specific you are in your subject material, like the subject of what you want your illustration or image to be, the more specific you are on that description, the less likely it is to abstract it. And I don't know why. My theory is that the AI just wants to prove that it can generate that temple in Kyoto that you really, really want to see, or that person standing on the beach. But if you write in a woman standing on the beach, looking out into the sea with her hair blowing in the wind, abstracted, lots of lens blur, slightly out of focus, it will not do any of that stuff. But if you just type woman on beach, abstracted, and you'll get what you want. And so, like, that was an interesting learning curve for me, which was I had to learn how to change the way I wrote my prompt to be less specific to get more abstraction, because in some ways I couldn't be specific about I wanted a woman with hair, because then it's going to be like it wants a woman with hair, it gets confused, it's going to represent that, and it doesn't want to abstract that because you said you wanted that. You're creating all kinds of conundrums in the way that it's interpreting that data. That's my assumption. I don't know the truth, but that was a pattern that I learned really quickly, is that I could get the level of blurring, the level of out focusedness, the photographic errors, the double exposures could happen if I didn't explain my subjects in detail. Right. And these are little tricks that you only learn when you start playing around with these tools. And something everybody can use today is, like, if you want to give more variance to what you get out of it, be less specific in your description of what you want.
Be less specific. Okay, that's
Which
definitely
is
counterintuitive
it's
than
very
what we've learned.
counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it also makes a lot more sense, because the more specific you are to giving an illustrator direction on what you want, the less improvisation they're going to do as part of that process. And so again, it is another one of those counterintuitive of like, being less of a control freak gets you
Mm,
more abstraction.
mm.
So that's the same thing you would probably get if you're working with a photographer and letting them lean into what they know how to do. So it's like, what's the right level of direction, but not over direction to the point where it can't fill in the gaps in certain places.
Right, right. I want to kind of shift our focus on like folks who are listening to this, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of folks probably on this call have maybe like a couple of years of design experience, and
Yep. Mm-hmm.
they're pretty, I don't know, like they've just got into the industry, and then it basically
Yep.
all changes with our conversation, right? Where
Yep. Exactly.
AI is this force. What do we like? How like? What's something that we could kind of either
Mm-hmm.
point them in the right direction? Like notice this. Like how do you set up someone that's a junior designer that comes into your
Mm-hmm.
team? What are some things they
Mm-hmm.
need to kind of like think about and really kind of play with?
So the biggest transformation for me, strangely enough, is that I was a people manager, managing a team of between 14 to 20 people at one point in my role here.
Mm,
And in the last year, I actually requested to go back to being an IC.
mm,
And that was specifically because I was being pushed a lot to have my team start using more AI in what they do. That was like the generic, you'll hear this, like somehow this is the problem that I think also happens with our industry is everybody hears AI and they're like, oh, I got to do AI. And one of the challenges I have as a leader is I didn't feel very comfortable doing that unless I did it myself. And so the best piece of advice I can give to anyone is use the tools.
yeah.
Like a great starting place for probably a lot of people on this call as they're thinking about what their career is or what they're doing. Print out a PDF of their presentation, print out a PDF of their portfolio, print out a PDF of their LinkedIn page, load it into one of these LLM tools, and start asking it questions about it.
Mm,
Learn how it thinks about things. Start using it that way. That's like the best piece of advice. Just start using it. Like the more you use these tools, the more you spend time with them, the more you'll start to see what they're good at, what they're weak at, and then you can start to strategize how to use them. There isn't a quick fix. It's like the old days of like UX design, app design. You just had to build things.
hmm.
Like if you didn't go in and build things and build prototypes, you didn't make progress. And the
Right.
same thing with this is that you just need to spend time immersed in using it.
Yeah.
Like a really, this is going to be a hilarious one. I have kids. We travel to Hawaii. One of the bigger challenges that I run into traveling to Hawaii, or I travel in general, is do I have enough trunk space in the car that I'm renting? I know this is a real first world problem, but do I have enough trunk space to handle all the stuff that I had to bring for young kids? And so one day I was planning my trip and I was looking for a car on Toro and I was like, I don't know how much, like, are these going to, it looks like it's going to fit. Because the problem was we went to one trip. I ordered a Prius, thought everything would fit in the big Prius, did not all fit in the big Prius. And to get to the hotel, we're like all like with bags up to our chins in the car. And so I was like, I wonder. And I tried this and I said, okay, I said, hey, ChatGPT, here's my car. This is what my car is. This is the car that I own. Can you please go out and find the cubic dimensions of my boot or trunk, depending upon where you are in the world, my boot or my trunk, do the dimensions of that with the lid closed because it is also an SUV. And I know if the last day we leave, we're probably going to drive around and do a last things. So I don't want all my bags hanging out of the bunk. So this is the space of with the top lid closed. So it's a privacy filter on. And then I gave it the three cars I was looking at. And I was like, and then analyze the trunk space of these and then tell me which ones match, have more or less. And it came back with like, this one has more, this one has less, this one has the equal amount. Then if not, you should also be thinking about these.
Mm.
It's now I can start to think about like, could you imagine if you collapsed all of that action into a button and then basically just had a button that somebody pressed and say like, tell me what your car is and I'll tell you whether this car will fit your needs or matches your needs. I never would have thought of that if I hadn't spent the time using the tool. And so like that's the part of like that we need to start thinking about this. And that also goes to another big tissue point that I've been pushing on a lot with this when we move beyond the tooling and into how do we start to build experiences using this? Because I think a lot of people here on the phone are going to also be thinking about how do I engage AI and to make better UX?
Yeah.
Part of it is also moving away from it being a chat and starting to think about, like, we have kind of immersed AI with the chat experience. Like sorry, I have a hand thing. I realize I don't fit all on screen with this. But we've immersed chat and AI as the same thing. The product is the chat and chat is AI, but that's not really the truth. Like when we look at how Figma's starting to implement it, when we look at how Photoshop's starting to implement it, we need to start thinking beyond just putting a chat bot on the screen. And to me, that was that thought of like, hey, what if I collapsed all of these interesting things that I was trying to do when I was renting a car into a button? And all I have to do is just enter into what my car is. And now, future state, I could actually show up in my search results. The AI could start producing. This car matches and doesn't match your car based on these parameters. How beneficial would that be to somebody? How much does that take a really hard task and collapse it into something small? It goes back to the most important value I have as a designer, which is that anything we build has to save people time. And so, like, how can we find ways to make AI save time? And I'm not sure a chat experience is always the best way to save time. But we won't know what those moments are that we can kind of collapse these really complicated things into until we start using these tools. So put your portfolio in there, ask it how you compare to other people, ask it for what you could do better. Your LinkedIn page, put your LinkedIn page in there, ask it, hey, how do I better show up for recruiters? How do I better get through filters? Because a lot of companies are now using AI filters to kind of review people's resumes and portfolios. Put your tool in there and ask it, what do I need to tweak in my language to make sure that I clear these filters that a lot of these organizations are using? Just start using it for things like that. Another trick that I use, interestingly enough, is I cook a lot, but I don't have certain things. This was a huge unlock, and again, this came from using it. I take a screenshot of the recipe that I'm using from my book, and then I go, this is the recipe I'm making. I need to reduce it by half, and I don't have mayonnaise. What should I use instead? I didn't have to type the recipe in or do anything like that. You can just take a shot because it's also really good at recognizing things that it takes photos of. Right. And then just gave it that parameters. And then all of a sudden, this has now changed the way I do cooking because I can, in the moment, make improvisations as I'm going. Again, that's another way that maybe there's a UX about take a picture of your bill or something and then help me understand why I wound up paying this much, or help me find ways to make savings on this on the next time I do it. Like, there are all kinds of things that we can think of, but we won't think about those experiences until we've used these tools and done it ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you that that chat box experience is just so basic and it has to evolve beyond that. And we've seen some companies think about sort of multimodal experiences, right? Take a picture, take a video, speak to it, speech to text, and then sort of linking all these things together. And do you think that based on sort of what you're working on, does it have to be a multimodal experience? And will it, AI as a tool, be in everything we kind of do?
I have a phrase I use a lot, which is AI is the turbocharger. We've all dreamed of building super personalized experiences in all of our thing, but it's always been the hardest thing to do because pulling all of that data and making those judgments has been really, really difficult. I'm not saying AI could do this perfectly, but it can start to do a little bit better of a job than what we've been able to do before in the past. But you don't know how to do that. The key here is that you need to know how to write the prompt on the back end that then triggers that action. And this is where I think learning how to prompt is important for designers, is that you have to learn how to not only design the button, but encapsulate what that prompt is going to accomplish when you press that button. So this is that idea of like understanding the logic of understanding what you're asking the AI model to do and what the results are that you want to get back are. You have to refine that part of the UX. This is the prototyping. This is the new version of prototyping that we have to do, is understand that we may want to bury some of this underneath of actions or loads or buttons, but we still need to design we have to do the hard work for the person using the product that we're trying to produce. We have to do the hard work of actually defining how to get that result for them. But then those results can start to become magical for people. And to me, that is where we're going to see the most benefit of AI in the next year to 2 years, because that's where we can really start to see really quick, meaningful improvements in our lives. I mean, let's be honest, Meta's already doing this right now. They've like completely crushed their advertising platform by using AI on what your patterns are to better recommend products to you. And they've greatly, I mean, take a look at their quarterly reports. Their numbers on advertising are through the roof, and their numbers of advertising through the roof is because they've learned how to use AI, not as a chatbot experience, but as an intelligence tool to better refine the results that they're customizing for people for ads. If they can do that for that, then we should be able to do that for anything else that we're trying to build. Right. It just requires us to spend time using them.
Yeah. I think, hopefully I'm not quoting this wrong, but recently Meta released that Reels did 50 billion in sort of total revenue, and that's in 3.5 years of launching that product on Instagram, which is unreal, right?
Unreal. And a lot of that is that they're learning how to refine their records using what they know about you and then having AI do interpretations on that. And AI can be better at selecting those things than their old algorithms could, or they can do it faster, or they can modify it faster. And so it's going to appear in places like this. It's not going to appear, and that's where I'm most interested in this, is that I move away from the big generalized AI tools, which they're fantastic, and I think we should all be using them. But I use them so I can start to think about how do I create these really fine-tuned paths or really fine-tuned UX that is amplified based on what these tools can do on the background.
Yeah. Dane had a question. Dane, Virginia. Any tools or resources you recommend to learn better prompting? Like, apart from doing it ourselves, do you use AI to help refine the prompt that you asked it? Is that like
Actually, that is not a bad thing to do. Actually, the first thing I started, when I first started learning how to prompt things, if I didn't get the result I wanted, I would sometimes ask, not that I would ask. So one thing I will say is always use more than one AI at the same time. So I tend to use multiples because sometimes I also find that if I ask Claude for a recommendation on how to better write a prompt for OpenAI, I'll get a better answer than if I ask ChatGPT. So like moving back and forth and bouncing between them is actually really helpful in those ways. Yes, asking these tools, like when you're trying to generate something and you want to prompt to replicate it, put in the image of what you want, ask it what to do, and then you can fiddle with it to get it to where you want to. If it doesn't give you the result that you want, then ask it why it didn't give you that result. How would you format it? The other thing that I will say is that when you want to start to get into really large scale advanced prompts. So I worked on a prompt that took me a while to learn how to write. I learned from scratch on how to write it. What I did find is that when I wanted to do multitask, so this was a system where it would go through and read a bunch of objects or titles of articles that we wanted to have illustrations with. It would then take those titles and then basically use a series of rules to then generate metaphors and settings for those illustrations. So the hardest thing in the illustration process is like when you sit down to do an illustration. The reason why I'm talking a lot about illustrations is this is where it's happening the fastest right now. Like that's what I'm saying is like you can look at the curve of this of where things are going. Figuring out what you're drawing is the hardest part, not what the drawing is going to look like. And so going through that process, I learned to build this tool. But what I found is that the way it got to the point where it's like 3 pages long, it's a 3-page long prompt. Yeah, this is because you have to, one of the things I learned very quickly is that you have to have it double check its work 3 times before it publishes it. So most of the bulk of the prompt was telling it what not to do rather than what to do. But the biggest thing I had to learn how to do, and this was a new skill for me, is I had to learn how to use Markdown. One of these things that these tools, when you get beyond just like a 1 or 2 phrase, if you really want these tools to follow your guidelines very strictly, learn how to write them in Markdown and use Markdown in the way that you put it into the box. Because one of the things I didn't realize until I started working with these is that's actually how they write their responses to themselves. Markdown is basically the formatting that they use on the back end. So when you get a result through ChatGPT or Claude, they're all structured. The code behind the scenes that's showing that what that is, the way it's structured for what it sees, is Markdown. So first thing I would say is learn how to use Markdown. It's a really effective tool for working with AI when you want to get to really complicated problems because it is basically how it talks to itself. So that's the syntax that's really helpful, like learning how to give it certain like headers, footers, bullets, spaces, those type of things. Markdown is it's a very clean, easy coding system that you can use to kind of set up data semantic data structure, and AI really loves that. So that's one thing I would say to learn. The other thing I would say is ask it for itself. And then the third I would say is YouTube.
Yep.
Like, you'd be surprised. Like, I'm betting somebody tried to solve a problem close to what you're trying to solve somewhere else. Go on YouTube, watch some videos on how people are writing prompts, and don't use them word for word, but start to use them as a framework on how you build your own. That's a big helping point in my mind.
Yeah.
And then finally, the other thing that I would say is really helpful, set up projects inside of any of these tools. You can do that in Claude, you can do that in ChatGPT, you can do that, and all of them have projects now. Projects are really beneficial because each of them has a different way of doing this. In ChatGPT, it's called a blueprint. In Claude, it's a customization that you have to add through the project settings. But basically, you can start adding rules on how and what you want it to do. And so you want to start using those things for projects so that you have different responses or different content dumps based upon what the project is. And so it's a really great way that you can kind of create a sequestered, customized approach to how it answers your questions or provides content to you that's relatable to the task that you're trying to do. So projects are really, really beneficial.
Dane has a follow-up. What about JSON? I've seen people structure their prompts in JSON too.
Yep.
Is that another thing we should be?
JSON is another great way of kind of starting to approach this. I will just say that JSON was out of my realm of knowledge base. And so Markdown was a lot easier as a designer for me to learn. I mean, at one point I was both a front-end engineer and a designer at the same time, because that was how in the 90s you had to do both. Yep. But at some point that job became so specific that it splintered off. And so my JSON knowledge isn't as deep, but it is very effective. Either one of them will work. I just picked Markdown and I recommend it to designers because I think it's a little bit more straightforward for us to understand how it works.
Got it. You mentioned that you build this tool for illustrations of articles. When are you going to share it with the world, Shamus?
Well, it's an internal tool, so I can't share it.
Oh, no.
It was an internal, and this is the other thing that I think also comes down to it. The reason it was an internal tool to help our design team on this is that it also was an issue of GPU cycles. And this is another thing that we don't talk about enough, is that everything that we do requires GPUs. And these GPUs are in some ways the most valuable assets that anybody has to have access to. And building a tool like that everyone in the world can use, the GPU cost would be astronomical. But building it as a tool for 10 designers within a design team to use was actually really achievable. And that's another thing that I think for us, as we're starting to work on these things, we have to really start to understand also, just like we used to have to learn how, business works. I think we also need to start understanding how and what are the limits of GPU usage when we're working on these kind of solutions, because you can do anything, but do you have the access to the amount of GPUs you need to do what you want to do is going to be the fundamental limiter for us as we're building these experiences from a UX perspective.
Sure. That makes sense. Well, I'm bummed. I want to use it, but maybe we can talk offline about it.
Well, no, but I can actually say, so one of the more crestfallen moments for me was that I had been working on all of this, and then I was talking to somebody and they introduced me to a company called Weavy. So I'm going to give 2 drops on here. Everyone should take a look at Weavy and Flora, because this is another one of those ways that we're starting to see really interesting ways that people can start to interact. It started with Comfy UI. It's now been moved into a cloud-based space with Weavy and Flora, where you can actually start to, the tool that I built was chaining together multiple different AIs. So you're chaining together an LLM plus a generative AI tooling to get a result. This is that was going to be my last point of, like, we've got to also, as we just want to start using this in our own work, we've got to learn how to actually attach all these things together. That used to be exceptionally hard. And what I built as the tool basically was that. You can do that with Weavy now without having to do any of the work that I did. And that's the really important thing, where you can attach an LLM to Claude, to all the different open source APIs that you can, or the APIs that are available for image generation. Then you can attach that image to Runway and create a chain. It's a node-based engagement model, which I think is also something that we as designers are more responsive to. Yeah. We can build a node network that eventually just starts producing material at the end of it. And that is, I'm really excited by this. This is where I started to really kind of see the future of what this could be without a chat-based interface. So for everybody on the call, spend some time looking at those tools, those 2 specifically. Weavy actually just got acquired by Figma. So That's a really fascinating company. They are based in Israel. It was a small group of people that put that together. I'm super happy for them. Their product is amazing. And the way that you can start to think about these things, once you start using tools like that, you start to change the way you approach these things. And again, it's how a designer would interact with AI. And that's the thing I find the most valuable with it.
Yeah, sure. Last couple of questions here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is a AI question, but would like
Mm-hmm.
to get your thoughts on it. Does it show up? If it doesn't, I'll give it a minute. Here we
Yep.
go. All right. As a product designer, need to research by taking help from ChatGPT, and then I am taking important information and mixing it with my own thoughts. So, what? Okay, I guess let
Yep.
me rephrase this in terms of, I'm doing research with ChatGPT and also what I think. What else am I missing, like in that process of like using ChatGPT for research and also my own sort of ground research or my own assumptions?
I mean, I think this goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about the human in the loop. And I think
Mm,
one of the things that is important here is that you need to still, you can't take what is produced out of these things and just use it. Again, you don't get ownership of it at that point. Then ChatGPT owns it. In some ways, this is that whole thing of like, are you going to be Jay Dilla? And are you going to transform that sample that you're going to get from this into something that's meaningful?
mm,
And I keep going back to this metaphor as a huge kid that grew up with sampling and the invention of sampling. And many people were like, oh, that's not real music. It is really music because when they transform it and they move it and they change the tempo or they tweak it or they take it out of context and put it in other places. This is what we can get from all of these different tools. We just have to learn to start thinking about things like Jay Dilla or Premiere or some of these
mm.
people that are absolutely masters at sampling. That's what a lot of these tools give us the opportunity to. And so how do we start sampling what we get out of these tools and then using it to build further on what we want to do?
Yeah, exactly,
Sorry,
exactly.
I everything in me is either a metaphor that relates back to food, architecture, or art, and eventually 90s hip hop. That's a guaranteed in this conversation. I think I've hit all three. Eventually, you're going to get like, that's a requirement of all conversations.
No, I mean that Jay Dilla reference. I was like, yes, keep going down this rabbit hole, and then Premiere came
Well,
up,
and I
and
mean,
I was like,
I'll get
yeah.
even deeper on it. Like, not only do you need to do that, but also this is where I was trying to be Jay Dilla. The goal with trying to figure out how to make mistakes in my
Mm,
images was to dequantize my beats.
there you
So if
go.
anybody knows who Jay Dilla is that he never put there's a thing inside of samplers called quantize where they line all your beats up on purpose. It's like the arrange setting on Figma where you just arrange everything based on Figma settings, which is a huge bugaboo for me because Figma doesn't always do optical alignment. It does box model alignment. And to your point of craft, I have a traditional graphic design background and alignments are like a big thing that irritates the bejesus out of me. And so when I see descenders and ascenders being X height, not using the X height, but using the ascender and that as your centering model, everything looks off balance to me, but that's just me being really pedantic. But that was what quantification would do is it would line the beats up and he didn't do that on purpose. And so his samples and his music always had this interesting swing and this humanity to it because he had infused the imperfections. He had brought the wabi sabi into what he was doing. And in
Mm,
some ways, that's what I think we need to learn how to do is these tools are really, really powerful, but when we also need to figure out how do we bring our humanness back into it? How do we find those accidents? How do we find those moments with these tools where it does something we didn't expect? And that's where the value comes from. Like I said, I took a photo on top of a photo by accident and it went made something beautiful. That has been the history of creativity for the longest time. And we need to make sure that we understand that this is just a new tool that helps us find moments like that.
So if anybody is interested in learning more about sampling, because I am also a 90s hip hop kid and I love this stuff, there's this
Yep.
great video by Mark Ronson on TED
Mm-hmm.
Talks, and it's called
Mm-hmm.
How Sampling Transformed Music. And he
Yep.
does this live. So you
Yep.
can kind of check that out. I'm trying to send it here, but
Yep.
maybe y'all won't see it. But anyway,
I
I
would
think
also
yeah,
recommend
yeah.
the one song podcast.
The One Song
So
Podcast. Okay.
one song podcast, they did like especially their breakdowns of Tripod Quest,
Mm,
electric relaxation, and then also what do you call it, scenario. and talking about the samples that they used and the importance of a posse cut for scenario and all those different things. It's a really, if you like music or into music and thinking about how music and it can be a great metaphor for how we approach design, that's a really great podcast to listen to.
Okay, one more, just as is on top of mind. There's a video by Vox called "How Jay Dilla Humanized His
Yes.
MP3000." It's
Yes.
so good. If you,
It is so good. Yeah.
it's so good. Anyway, okay, we're
But
going off here, but yeah.
But it's going off, but it's a really great way for us to also start to find. It's the same thing that happened. Like, I'm an art history minor, so I did art history as a minor in art school. If you look at paintings before the invention of cameras and you look at paintings after the invention of cameras, they changed. For so long, the use of the camera, the use of a painting was to replicate what the real world had. And I think most people thought paintings were going to die when cameras came out. But no, what paintings then started to move into is, what is the emotion that you're trying to cover? What are the colors? What is the impression? Full abstraction came out because of all of that. That's the same thing as we have a new camera. We have a new tool to use in the way that we build what we do. It is a tool. It is not anything more than that. And we just need to learn how to approach this. And again, I went back to starting in this industry I was in college in '93. I started doing graphic design. There was a moment where Quark came out, and here's an interesting fact. One of the reasons why the filter or the masking color in Photoshop is ruby colored is because there used to be this thing called RubyLith. I was the last generation had to do this. When you used to want to mask a photo out of something, you had to take an X-Acto knife and the sheet of ruby film and cut the image, trace the image with an X-Acto knife on ruby, and send those two things taped together to the printer, because they would take a photo of it and the photo wouldn't show anything that was covered in the ruby color. That's why the mask filter in Photoshop is ruby colored, because it's matching RubyLith. Those people that used to do that task were like, Photoshop's terrible. This is not the way things should be done. This is not how it's going to go. And people that used to lay type out by hand with Letraset were like, Quark, and most people here on the call don't even know what Quark is, but in design, what are these tools that are doing this? This isn't the humanity of what we do. We all eventually had to learn how to change it. All that stuff came out, and then we got David Carson, which is my moment on this, is that this uniformity and the ability for us to make things perfect then all of a sudden brought about a path of imperfection. I think we're in a moment where we're going to find ways to make imperfect things with these tools, and that's what excites me the most. And I don't think we need to be afraid of it. I think we need to lean into it, because the more we lean into it, the more we're going to be able to do what we want to do.
Perfect. I think that's a great place to leave it, Shamus. That hour went by so quickly. We could definitely nerd out about music much more.
Totally.
But again, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're so welcome, and I'm sure folks would want to hear more about your story and how you think about this industry. Where's the best place for folks to find you? Do you have anything you want to mention, what you're working on, and stuff like that? Yeah.
Here's interesting. This is my first time ever doing something like this. So
that's good.
Is part of it is because I realized, actually, this is an AI moment. I am trying to figure out what I'm doing in my career next and where I'm going from, and how do I help support people in this change that I see coming. And I asked, I have some of my portfolio work put together, and I asked ChatGPT to look at my portfolio work, look at my LinkedIn page, and then look at if you were to look at my public perception, does any of this match? And the first thing it said is, nobody knows who you are. And so I'm in the process of trying to figure out how best to do this. So the best way to get a hold of me right now is to ping me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active over there. I think it's a great way for me to kind of talk to people and help support people. I'm very passionate about helping people come along on this journey, because I think this isn't just about what I'm doing, but it's about helping our industry make this transition. And I think it's a good transition for us to make. And I want to be a positive voice for people with that, and a supporting voice. And so find me there. More will come. I just need to find the time. It's just a little bit more difficult with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. So, and I'm shocked they didn't come in on the call. I'm very you would have seen my 2 kids show up, so that would have been hilarious.
Well, very, very well behaved, because they know
Yes.
Daddy's performing live like Jay Dilla.
That's performing live, and he can't off stage. So
there you go. Well, you're doing amazing, Shamus. So
thank you.
Someone says I don't see a link above. I will drop it in the comments afterwards, but Shamus should be tagged. So go to the main page on LinkedIn.
There aren't many Shamus Scotts, especially ones that spell it incorrectly on LinkedIn. So if you type in Shamus, my family's the most American Irish ever. They gave me the name Shamus, the nickname Shamus, but they spelled it the Gaelic way. I mean, not the Gaelic way, but the Yiddish way.
Yeah.
So if you look up Shamus, it's a Yiddish word for detective, but it's also an Irish name spelled Seamus. But my family did it the wrong way. It's the most American thing you can possibly do. But just type in Shamus Scott, you'll find me. It's not that hard. There aren't many of me.
Okay. Well, you should be able to find him on, the event description, all that stuff. It should be linked there. If not, I'll make a note and post it on the YouTube and all the other associated channels so you can follow up with Shamus about your questions and stuff. Again, Shamus, I'm gonna thank you one last time and take you off stage, but it was an absolute pleasure to have a chat.
Oh, and I wanted to say thank you to Chris. I really appreciate this. It's my first time doing it. It was way more painless than I expected to be, and I just wanted to thank you so much for your help and your support on this. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime. And we'd love to have you back on again whenever.
Anytime.
Whenever you want to chat. Okay.
No problem. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, man. See ya. All right, guys. As we come to a close, I obviously want to remind you one last time about what's going on this whole November. You can get 50% discount at uxplaybook.org. All of my playbooks. It's literally the best deal of the year. So 50% off all November. You can scan that QR code or head to uxplaybook.org. Enter code FRIYAY25. Again, I only do this once a year, so instead of waiting until 2026, this is your chance. And I also want to talk about, if you like conversations like this, you can also get notified for any time a guest comes on and a topic that you care about. Today we spoke about AI, but next week, where is it? I am speaking to Tommy Gioco about this whole idea of how a designer creates, right? So we're going to be speaking about taste and how to develop it, play, how we should approach our work with a sense of play. And then number 3, stories. What goes into building a great story for your work or for what you're trying to do, and so much more. If you know Tommy and you follow him on the socials, he's such a amazing person in terms of documenting what's happening in our industry and all the awesome designers out there. He's doing a couple of series, one called This Is Taste, where he follows great designers and figure out what is their creative process, how do they work, what are they actually doing to produce amazing stuff. And another one called State of Play, where it's another podcast format, but speaking to, the head of design at Cursor and so on. So Tommy is on the ground doing his journalism for you designers, and I have him on next week, which is one day before Thanksgiving. So it's a very sort of special guest. Tune into that and scan that QR code. And I don't think I have anything else for you guys. Again, these conversations are recorded, so head to the YouTube for the full episode. Just search Chris from UX Playbook. And until next time, bye. This is the design of everyday people.
It sound right, boy.
This is the design of everyday people.
It sound right, boy.